So I was working on this. I've heard a lot about Genesis 10. I can tell you up until recently, it's not something I'd put a lot of study into personally. Well, yeah, growing up, as I'd read through Genesis, I'd be like, yep, there's another one, and Tower of Babel, cool. So, some of those narrative portions are definitely a lot easier to read. They're a lot more entertaining on the front end, but there's some cool things you can find through even the and so begat so, and these are the generations of and the families of. Yeah. So they're important because they're in the Word of God, and so they're there for a reason. Actually, this is probably one of the best early genealogies explaining, the early history after the flood. You've got. Yeah. If you don't have some study into it, there's very few that you will probably recognize. Even when you put some study into it, there's some of these people, they're like, we don't have any idea who these people were or where they were. Some of them people kind of have a guess at, and that's okay, because really it's not going to change your theology a whole lot either way, depending on where you think they went. But there are some pretty cool things you can find out about with it. So we'll go ahead and we'll do the reading. You guys will all get a chance to read today, maybe and then some. Does anyone need a paper? Has everybody got one?
Does anybody need coffee?
We're going to go ahead and get started. Chapter 10, this is kind of going to be more of a history lesson maybe than something very deeply theological. I heard John MacArthur say about this passage, this is how to tell if you'd like seminary, because there's a lot of history and how things work together and things like that. So I thought that was kind of funny. But anyway, chapter 10, let's start in verse 1. John, do you want to start us off today?
Sure. Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were sons born after the flood.
All right, so this verse introduces the whole chapter. That's what the whole thing's about. So if you were hoping at some point you'd get away from genealogies, nice try. But, you have to remember, everyone on earth is related because we're all related to Noah and his sons. So, Rhonda, go ahead.
The sons of Japheth, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshech, and Tiras.
Okay. So this genealogy starts with Japheth. Now, Japheth is not the oldest. I'm going to clarify that now. So Japheth is not the oldest, and so it's interesting they put Japheth first. Okay. We'll talk more about that as we keep going. But when we look at Japheth and we look at the names that are attached to him, he gives, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 names. 7 sons that it addresses. Now note, it doesn't name any of the daughters. They would have had daughters as well, because otherwise, where are these people coming from? This is for the people that range from Greece to India. These people would have had an expansive amount of territory that they would have covered. And really, if you think back to what God said when Noah blessed some and cursed Canaan, what he said was that he was going to enlarge Japheth. Japheth would be enlarged. And so if you look at it, probably one of the most numerable groups would have been Japheth at this point. Now, when you look from Greece to India, something they found, as they've looked very closely, is that there seems to be a common language between these places. They seem to have stemmed off a common language. Now, that's not everywhere in the world, but these places specifically. And they said it seems to all go back to an ancient Sanskrit, which is pretty interesting. These are the Indo-European nations. There are some of these names and some of these people that we know more about than others. Gomer is one that we know a little bit about, not a ton. These are suggested to be maybe the Gauls, Galassi, or the Celts. These are people that would have existed in that range. So this is obviously far west Greece, or not Greece, but like the European area. Magog is one that was difficult to pinpoint. Seemingly, they would have gone north. A lot of people suggest up by the Caspian Sea. Tubal and Meshech seem to have been attached to the Assyrians somehow. There are inscriptions referencing the Mushki and Mushku and the Tabali. So as you'll recognize over time, even when we look at the name Isaiah from Old Testament to New Testament, it's not spelled the same way. It maybe look a little different, but it's referencing the same person. And so sometimes as you look at names over time, you have to be a little creative because they may not be exactly the same, but you can kind of see a similar stem that will pass along. Cities and rivers around Russia seem to fit this name very well. So think about Meshech, when you kind of get the name Mushki or Mushku, think about the name Moscow, Mushku. You have some similar rivers there, like the Tabali River, things like that, up around that area. So these people may have ended up near the Russian area, which is pretty interesting. Madai seems to be related to the Medes, and Javan seems to have portions with the Greeks. Now, some of these are really interesting because you'll find that they have, there are things that we call people that we don't really think about. And we somewhat already associate these kind of names with them, but they're not names that we say very often. But for some reason, if we really thought about it, names or names similar to these would be used to refer to some of these people groups. And we'll see that in specific cases here in a minute. So as it continues down the line, one of the sons of Japheth that they talk about will be Gomer. So somebody read verse 3.
And the sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, and Togarmah.
Yep. So Ashkenaz. You guys think you've ever heard anything that sounds like Ashkenaz? Okay. Now, Ashkenaz seems to have also gone up north. The idea is that they may have eventually had something to do with Germany. How many of you guys have heard of Ashkenazi Jews? Okay. That actually is a term that I've heard before. But German Jews sometimes are called Ashkenazi Jews. Then there's Togarmah. This would be a direct ancestor to the Armenians. Something very common for Armenians is the house of Targum. So you have some of these base words and base names that seem to relate to specific areas. Verse 4.
And the sons of Joktan, Elishpa, and Tarshish, Kittim, and Elkanah.
Yeah. So, well, hold on. You got to pronounce it I'm just kidding. Yeah, I know. So it's interesting. Although Japheth has 7 sons, only 2 of them are given more lineage to. This shows maybe some of the accuracy of the Bible. This may have just been people that Moses knew about. So it also could be, people that matter to the story itself. So there are things that people don't know about in the Bible. There are, so like this could be Moses' understanding of these early generations of people. Now, Javan seems to be west. These reference to different Greek peoples. You guys have heard of the city of Tarshish? I don't know anybody who is there. or trying to go there. Maybe he got swallowed by a whale or something. Then there is Kittim. Kittim is a really interesting name. Kittim, depending on the language you go to, translates to something similar to the idea of Zeus. And so some people think some of these early, maybe still long-living people could have been mythologized to be more than they were. So like Kittim could have been mythologized to be even divine, even though he was not. But you got to remember, over this time, they're still living good lengths of time, but it's getting less and less and less. So you have these people who have been around seemingly forever compared to other people. And then, as I've heard, the Dodonim seems to actually be attached to like the people of Rhodes. So there's interesting combinations there. Now, verse 5.
A.D. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after this time, after their families in their nations.
Yeah.
I know.
She got none of the names. Interestingly enough, there's kind of bookends for each person. You get, it starts off by telling you Japheth, and then it says, oh, and these were their people, these were their nations, these were their lands. So it obviously shows Moses had an understanding of what was coming in the next chapter, because at this point, we've not been told about the Tower of Babel yet. This would have happened in the midst of some of these people's lives. And so he says, this is how these people were divided. These were the people of this area, this area, them and their families, everyone after their tongue, families, and nation. And so he had an understanding of who these people were prior to and after the Tower of Babel, which is really interesting. Now, you have to keep in mind, although we, don't think about this all the time, Moses would have lived another 350 years after the flood, let alone how long his sons lived.
You mean Noah?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Noah would have lived another 350 years after the flood. Whoops.
That's a good trivia trick.
It is, yeah. When did Moses build the ark? Yeah, I've asked that one before. I thought about getting one of you guys with that on the test the other day. Yeah. Anyway, so he would have lived another 350 years. So he would have known more of his descendants, and they would have had firsthand account of the flood. Not to mention, his sons were also firsthand witnesses to the flood. So if you look from the people and how long these people potentially would have lived, they would have gotten very close to the time of Abraham. And so, the people of Israel know all about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So they would have had a very clean understanding of history through this point. In the first 10 generations, Adam and Seth would have lived through 9 of them, all the way to Noah. Noah would have been the first kid they wouldn't have met. And so you'd have all this really good first-person history that you could get from the original sources for extended periods of time. So it's pretty cool that they have this listed here. These were the heads of their families, nations, as we talked about. This would have stretched between Europe through India. This fulfills that blessing of Noah, that Japheth would be enlarged. Now, I will say as well, there are some people who believe Japheth are also the ones that would have been the original Native Americans and South Americans, because they think they would have gone through Russia, because they are known to be in Russia, and then taken that way down Alaska and kind of come back that way through the land bridge. So there are a lot of people who hold Japheth would be the original people for the Americas as well. So if that was the case, God had certainly enlarged Japheth. Verse 6.
And the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mizraim, and Phut, and Canaan.
How does everybody want the name Foot? All right. I'm sure it didn't mean that in their time, so it doesn't really matter. But so they start talking about the descendants of Ham. They only talk about 4 of them listed here. And even then, they won't give you information on all 4. So Cush, the first son, it starts listing his children. It says Seba and oh wait, I'm sorry.
Wrong verse.
What?
We're not there yet. We're on verse 6.
Well, but
We're not on 7.
I was reading 7. All right. So Ham seems to have been the people related in Africa, Canaan, and potentially the Oriental peoples as well. So you have this group that would have gone part of to Africa, part of to stayed in the Middle East, and part of them gone further. The idea is some of these people would have been like the original Chinese and things like that. So the sons of Cush would have been Sheba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, Sabteka, and the sons of Rama, Sheba and Dedan. So it gives even a grandchildren on some of these, which is interesting. So these went east or south, depending on which one they are. Cush in the Bible is generally the name for Ethiopia. And Cush, the person Cush, would have built his area directly east of the Fertile Valley. And we know that because Cush begat Nimrod. Cush begat Nimrod. And he had begun to be a mighty one on the earth. Nimrod seems to be the prototypical powerful leader, which is really important. Notice that almost nobody else in here gets this extended section upon who they were and what they did. But Nimrod does. He became a man of prominence.
That was one name I recognized, was Nimrod.
Yeah. Joe, do you want to read the next verse?
And the sons of Cush, see,
Wait a minute,
are you, which one is it?
I'm sorry, we're at 9. I read a couple.
Where was I?
I don't know.
Okay.
He read those two.
You guys heard history and you said we're out.
Yeah.
All right.
He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, wherefore it is said, and even Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord.
So that must have been like just a statement that they would have understood, a statement that they would have known, that Nimrod was well known, even to the point that God would know who he was, which is kind of an interesting concept, which obviously he knows everyone, but he would have been a man of extreme prominence. Now, some people suggest that hunter would have been better translated warrior, namely just saying that he would have been someone who would be a conqueror, someone who would have been powerful. And you can kind of see this by verse 10. Go ahead and read verse
And the
10.
beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar.
So you see, this is the first time the word kingdom is used. He has a kingdom. So the idea is he may have been taking over other peoples and other areas to consolidate them to have this one kingdom in the land of Shinar. And as you guys well know, we're going to hear about Babel in the very next chapter.
Alex, my note says, I'm sorry, baby, my note says, the name Nimrod means let us revolt.
Yeah.
Yeah, so fans require like to take over or to.
Well, and think about what God told them to do. You've got be fruitful and multiply,
Yeah,
and they're to spread out over the earth.
yeah, yeah,
Nimrod instead says, let's consolidate power, let's make a kingdom.
yeah.
And let it all belong to me.
Yeah.
But the land of Nimrod is the Assyrians.
Yeah. Yeah, so Shinar is interesting. I remember even that just from our reading this past week, it made a comment about which is the land of Shinar. So you run into some things like that here and there. But yeah, I believe that would have fallen under the land of the Assyrians or eventually the Babylonians, aka Babel. So you definitely have some of those people there. Although there are some of the other people that seem to also have a play in the Assyrians, or have people that seem to line up with the Assyrians in Japheth's line. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff with that. Verse 11.
From that land he went into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Ir, Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah. That is the great city.
Yeah,
Oops, sorry.
that's okay. So yeah, really interesting. Never heard of this city called Nineveh before. It's not like that's going to come back to bite anybody. They seem to build this powerful dynasty, this powerful place where he's got cities, he's got a kingdom, he's got lots of land, he's consolidating power. And some of these places were powerful for off and on for extended periods of time. I mean, think about, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians. Those people were the ones that came in and potentially, not potentially, did take over Israel. And brought them back and used them as tributaries and did all these things. And now they'd have times where they were more powerful and less powerful, just like all nations do. But they were significant nations nonetheless. Verse 13.
About if I do 13 and 14?
Go for it.
Mizraim was the father of the Ludites, Anamites, the Habitites, and Nephutites, Hathusites, Casusites, from whom the Philistines came, and Caphtorites.
Yeah. So I was going to make the note if you're using the King James and it says "im" on the back as a plural pronunciation. So this is actually probably talking about peoples, families, like ites. Generally, they can be said as "ims" or "ites." Either way is a good way to translate that. So that is what's going on there. So it's telling you where these different people groups, where they came from. They came from Mizraim. You got the Ludites or the Ludim. You got the Anamim, the Ammonites, that kind of thing. So you've got two of the sons of Ham so far. I believe the only one that doesn't get any love is Foot. And I know that because his name is Foot. Just kidding. But he's, I think, one of the ones that doesn't get a lot of description here. So how about verse 15?
And Canaan begat Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth.
Woo! All right, so we talked a little bit this past week in our Old Testament study. There was a very important conquest that was made, and it was the conquest of Sidon and Og. One of the first conquests that was made by the people of Israel as they're getting ready to move into the land, the Promised Land. And so just understand the sons of Canaan were people who would have inhabited that area. They would have been all through that section. And these were the people, by the way, that were cursed by Noah. These were the people, it was not Ham that was cursed, which is a common misunderstanding. It was Canaan who was cursed. And so a lot of people, and we talked about this a little bit last week, have used the idea that Ham was cursed as a fuel for racism, saying that, oh, well, Ham's descendants went into Africa or Asia or these other places, and therefore they're cursed. No. Because it wasn't Ham that was cursed. It was Canaan, specifically. And the Canaanites, we know what happened to them. God said the land spewed them out. And God obviously worked in that scenario with the people of Israel. But they were definitely cursed. Verse 16.
And the Jebusites, and the Amorites, and the
Girgashite. Sounds good to me. All right. John, we're going to kick back over to you.
The Hivite and the Archite and the Sinite.
All right. So, specifically, I want to talk about the Sinites. Sign is a common word to reference the Orient. It is a common word among them to reference people who are of pure blood. So you can see that some of these people would have been those that would have gone and lived in the Oriental areas. Many emperors would use sign as a title, and the study of China is called sinology. So you have this concept that these people came from Ham's line. Now, really, really interesting. I found this out yesterday, and I think I actually had heard it before from Carolyn because she had some family from China. The character for boat in Chinese is made up of 3 words. And now you have to understand their words are pictures that are made. It's made up of 3. The first one is the word container. The second one is the word for person, but it looks like a mouth. And the third one is the word 8. So 8 people in a container. The ark, yeah. So the concept is they bring their study of themselves all the way back to the flood, which is pretty nifty. So pretty cool. I'm told there are a lot of things like that in the Chinese language. I don't know any of them, but apparently there have been whole books written. Kind of like there are books written on things that the Bible knew that they shouldn't have known about medical things. Like circumcision on the 8th day and why that's a benefit and good things for that. I just got a book of 100 archaeological finds that, help prove the Old Testament and things like that. And so there are lots of different books on different professions. And this is one of those things where it's a really good thing that God made us all different, because some of us can then go and study out those different areas, become experts in a field, and then say, man, the Bible talks about that. That's so cool because here's this. And it just gives credence from all these different areas, all these different parts of life about how we know that God is true, how we know his word is true, and why we can trust it. So,
Sin, that S-I-N, means pure blood.
it can be taken among the Chinese to be a reference to those who are of pure blood.
We put on the paper pure bread.
Same difference, pure
which
bread and
is-
pure bread.
It wasn't supposed to have the A, it was pure bread, like,
Got it.
yeah.
Pure bread.
You know,
Pure bread, yeah, not pure bread. We're not, yeah.
I know exactly what you mean.
It's not unleavened. That's the problem. All right. In case anyone noted, I am not the best speller. And sometimes, especially if my word thing does not catch it, you will get bread instead of bread, or...
Well, bread is an actual word, it wouldn't have corrected
I know, that's the problem.
it. Yeah. Some of them will correct grammar and stuff. but
Praise the Lord.
evidently yours doesn't.
Mine will correct some grammar.
Capital letters.
Yeah, the capital letter thing. Rhonda's going to shoot me. Anyway, let's keep going. Verse 18.
And the Arvadite and the Zimmerite and the Hamathite, and afterwards were the families of the Canaanites spread abroad.
Yeah. All right, verse 19.
And the order of the Canaanites was from Sidon to Succomus to Gerar, and unto Gaza, and thou goest unto Sodom and Gomorrah, and Admah, and Zebul, or whatever, and even unto Lasha.
There we go. All right, so it even gives you dimensions kind of for where in general these people stayed, where they landed, what happened. Now, obviously, if the Sinites are the ancient relations to the Oriental people, they would have had to have gone a little bit farther than that at some point. Maybe they didn't originally, but they eventually went that far. I don't know. So, verse 20.
Wait, so Alex, are they saying Sodom and Gomorrah were Canaanites?
It said that this would have gone unto Sodom and Gomorrah. Yeah.
In the direction?
Yeah.
Order, yeah.
So they just used something that would have been understandable to the people as a placeholder, like towards Sodom and Gomorrah.
They were neighbors.
Something like that. So something that drove me crazy. If you ever give me directions, please don't tell me landmarks. I had a friend who do that. They're like, there's this weird fence on the corner. You'll see it. And I'm like, what does that even mean? I'm like, tell me a street name. They have those for a reason. What street do you live on? I'm like, I can look up on a map and get street names. They don't tell me where the weird fence is on the corner. Now, in my own head, after I've been driving somewhere long enough, I will make landmarks in my own mind and be like, there's that gas station. It's going to be in like 2 turns. But I don't tell people that when I give them directions. It just,
That's the only way we could navigate Alabama,
is it?
10 years ago, maybe. Count 11 street poles and turn left at the burnt out chimney stack. Right?
God forbid they ever fix that chimney stack. You guys are going to be
And
stuck.
they did.
Ah!
It was late at night, and you think I was going up at somebody's house in Alabama, knocking on the door.
Were you the burnt chimney stack?
Where's that old chimney stack?
All right.
The good old days.
Where are we at? Verse, do we do 20?
These are the sons of Ham after their families, after their tongues, in their countries, and in their nations.
Okay, so you have this concept again. He bookends it again, says, all right, this was Ham. We're done with Ham now. And then they finally open it up to the sons of Shem. Verse 21.
Unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth, the elder, even to him were children born.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Shem would be older than Japheth, but this is set up to lead to the story of Abraham. They put his genealogy last because they know that coming up, we're going to talk about these specific people. These are the people that Abraham's going to come from. And as you work through, that's what the whole point of the book of Genesis is. It's giving you a specific history. It's giving you the covenant people and how they got there. It's not just a full history of the world. There are plenty of things it leaves out. Namely, there are no daughters mentioned as of yet. There are lots of things that are not talked about but would have been there. All right, so this is where the Semites come from. The children of Shem, Elam. Wait, who just read? I'm just starting to read. Go ahead. Go ahead and read, Neil.
The children of Shem, Elam and Asher and Arphaxad and Lud and Aram.
Now you may recognize some of these names. If you're in Genesis chapter 14, you may have heard of a king named Chedorlaomer. He was a Confederate king. He had other people he was in charge of, and they were currently, at the time of Abraham, they were ruling over 5 of the kings of the Canaanites, including, but not limited to, they would have been ruling over Sodom and Gomorrah. This would have been how Lot's nephew gets taken, because they were trying to revolt against the people who were in charge of them. Abraham's nephew Lot gets taken, that's right, because they were trying to revolt, and then the kings that they were revolting against said, okay, great, let's fight. Yeah, so, yeah. Just recognize you've heard some of these places before, you've heard of some of these names before, and you may know specific people from these areas if you're familiar with the coming passages in Genesis. Verse 23 says, and the children of Aram, Uz and Hul and Gether and Mash. Do we know anyone who lived in Uz? Job did. So you have this concept there. So Job would have been either contemporary to or shortly before the time of Abraham. So that's interesting to think about. So the book of Job would fit right inside about Genesis 11 or 12. So it's a good thing they don't do that to us, because that would be confusing. But that's timeline-wise, when we think of the book of Job, sometimes we have a hard time placing when it actually is.
So how do you get that he was a contemporary from that?
That
And it says that the children were there, right? And he said he lived in the city of Uz.
Right, so I'm assuming the city of Uz came after the person Uz.
Right?
Is
But that doesn't necessarily follow that he was a contemporary of.
well, and I think what I specifically said is he would have lived either shortly before or would have been contemporary with Abraham. It wouldn't be exact. I'm just saying he would have lived closer to that time than any other time. Yeah. Which is interesting because it shows that there were other people who knew about the one true God, which you get pictures of with people like Melchizedek and Job and things like that. So, verse 24, go ahead.
And Arphaxad begat Selah, and Selah begat Eber.
Okay. Verse 25.
And unto Eber was born 2 sons. The name one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided, and his brother's name was Joktan.
Now, what do you guys think that means? In these days, the earth was divided.
Earthquake, big splitting movement.
That'd be a good answer.
That's what I got from.
So, I've heard some people suggest that it would be around the time of Peleg when the Tower of Babel would have happened. Therefore, the splitting of the nations would have occurred. And so during his time, the land was divided, or the earth divided. Now, it's interesting. It's thought that Eber is the base for the term Hebrew. So Eber would have been the origination of the term Hebrew. Verse 26.
Could I say, I've heard also, and maybe it's really far-fetched, that there was a separation of the continents.
Yes,
What I was
And that
there certainly
that's
would have
what it
been.
means, yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know during that time or if that would have happened during the flood and this
I-
was all post-flood.
Yeah, because this is all post-flood, I mean, you may have even more separation going on from time to time, but I think the flood would have begun that separation somewhat. What'd you say? Global warming. That's right. That's right. That's exactly what happened. Those people were using too many admissions.
Too much hairspray.
Too many cows were around. They needed to eat more beef. Chick-fil-A existed all the way back then. All right. Eat more beef. All right, verse 26.
Joktan was the father of Almadad, Shelef, Hazmaveth, Jerah.
Man, I'm so glad they gave us easy names.
And we thought Atticus was funny.
That's right.
I mean,
Royal.
I meant
It's all right.
different.
I thought.
I'm not offended. It's okay. All right, verse 27. Bob?
And Hadaram, and Uzal, and Dikla.
All right, verse 28.
And
Oh.
Obal, and Abigail, and Sheba.
29.
And Ophir, Fear, and Havilah, and Jobab, and all those sons of Joktan.
Now, if you recognize, you may have heard the names Ophir and Havilah before. I'm pretty sure as it's describing the Garden of Eden, some of those names are used there too. So, interesting. Verse 30.
And the dwelling was from Mesha as thou goest into the seaport and Mount on the east.
All right, and these are the sons of Shem after their families, and their tongues, and their lands after their nations. I just skipped Anna. Go ahead, Anna.
These are the families of the sons of Noah, after their generations, in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood.
Okay, so it just basically reiterates verse 1 again. It's trying to tell you this is the people after the flood. They all came from one family. This is everybody. This is how it all came to be. Now there are people, like we said, that are not well listed. There's some of the sons of these of Japheth and Shem and Ham. You never hear anything about some of their kids. Like you never know what Foot happened. Like what happened to Foot. Well, hopefully it wasn't cut off. Yeah,
Well, not everybody lived a long life.
that's
They may
true.
not live to make a base.
Maybe, but it could be that. It could be that, you know, there are just other peoples and groups that they would have been a part of that maybe just didn't play into the story. They didn't feel necessary to mention. Or it could be Moses didn't know the answer of what happened to them, and so he didn't write it down. So like I said, history would have been pretty well preserved up until this point due to the length of life and how close these patriarchs would have lived to the people who were doing the next portion of it. But that still doesn't mean that you'd remember everything. So there's plenty of things that I'm sure my great-grandma said that I don't have any idea what that was. But, so, anyhow. So that is chapter 10. If you did not like the genealogy of that, good news, you get a little bit of a break. There's a couple more in Genesis, though, so you're not safe. But we go to a familiar story in chapter 11, which may bring a little bit of enjoyment. So